So where do you've been doing this for a few decades, a couple decades now. Um, where do you see pilgrimage studies evolving?
Or everywhere and anywhere if I had my way. That's probably the answer. I think that there is an increasing effort to look at non-traditional pilgrimage. I mean, we've seen this for quite a while, things like dark pilgrimage, secular pilgrimage, political pilgrimage. And there's still a tension there about whether or not those things really are pilgrimage, because, I mean, any long distance walk nowadays seems to be badged a pilgrimage, even if it has no spiritual underpinning at all. Um, so I think there'll be more investigation there. I mean, I cover that in one of the chapters in my book that looks at pilgrimage in Buenos Aires, where there is no saint, there is no shrine. It's focus on Eva Peron. Um, so I think there'll be more there. I think there will be a greater interest on war because of the age in which we're living, and because of the great work you're doing. So that will flag that up very nicely. And as you know, pilgrimage and war is something that more people than you think are interested in on the fringes. And I'd like to think that there will be greater consideration of how pilgrimage is done, whether it's at the shrine or how you get there. Because particularly going into the public sphere, because obviously you can do the academic stuff and how many people will actually access that. But certainly more of a public conversation about what do you mean how you do pilgrimage? What do you mean that's cheating? How is it cheating? So I'd like to engage with those sorts of questions more, and why people think that's the case and get so het up about it when they see somebody getting off a bus having done the pilgrimage. Perfectly valid way of doing it. So.
You're probably privy also to Facebook groups, forums, communities that form around pilgrimage. And for many people, it really does seem that the pilgrimage itself is a new type of religion that has rules and regulations and how to get it right. And, you know, in the case of the Camino, it's fascinating to see conversations around which walking sticks are right and
yes.
the socks and the minutia. And it's an indicator, I think, that it's a new type of religious practice, but also maybe its own religion, where there are different ranks, and you know, people who are repeat pilgrims have a higher status in the group and can offer kind of this wisdom to other people. So this is very interesting.
It is, isn't it? And they create their own community. And quite often when they've been on pilgrimage, they come back and link up again. And yes, it seems to create its own separate thing, doesn't it? It's quite extraordinary. I wonder if you map that, whether it would be primarily people who were sort of modern secular spiritual pilgrims, whether it happens more for them and less for, let's say, groups of Catholic pilgrims who already have that religious culture. I wonder if there's a difference.
I think so. I think when we look at this continuum that Noga Collins Kreiner talked about, with this sort of secular and sacred continuum, in many ways there's an arc happening where the secular pilgrims are sort of bouncing back around to being quite fundamental in how they view pilgrimage. So I do think there's that the question is correct that you're asking. It does seem that it is more the secular pilgrims that are kind of taking this on, and in many ways it's completely changing their identity, where the primary identity emerges as that of a pilgrim.
I wonder if it's partly that the zeal of the convert. People who take up these things tend to be more extreme about how they do them and why they do them than people who've grown up with them and just don't really give it not as much spiritual thought. It's still important to them, but they don't worry about the minutiae of the socks or the sticks.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think you're right. I'm also really interested to hear your perspective on what seems from across the Atlantic. When I look at pilgrimages in the British context, it just seems to be exploding. And what is that? Why is that happening?
That is a really good question. Why is that happening? Because obviously for centuries we didn't have or shouldn't have had a pilgrimage tradition, though we did. And it starts to really pick up in the second half of the 19th century and then into the 20th century, where Anglicans also take on pilgrimage for a variety of reasons. And then the last few decades, interest, I suppose, in well-being, particularly mental well-being, mental health, taking time out for yourself. A lot of that has become very important. We've had far more long-distance walking routes regenerated. We had long-distance ones in Britain that we'd always had, like the Offa's Dyke and Hadrian's Wall. But there seem to be constantly launches of new ways and caminos where historically there is no pilgrimage route, but people have joined up churches. I think it's partly perhaps a reaction against, this is such a sweeping generalization, a reaction against modernisation and the fact they're all sitting at desks in offices and people want to get out and they want a reason to justify doing that. They can't say I'm going for a walk. So they may, if you were doing a pilgrimage, it has more meaning and there's more purpose behind it. So that might be part of it. It might be easier facilitation because these routes are being made. So people can join them and they can, engage in an activity that others are engaging in. So some sort of sense of community. And I suppose more broadly, it is the long-term influence of things like the Camino. As soon as that was adopted as a cultural route by the EU in the 80s and promoted, it picked up, actually it took a few years, but by the end of the 20th century, it was massive. Hundreds of thousands went every year. And until then, a couple of hundred had gone. So dribs and drabs. And I think that's had a real impact, not just in Britain, but everywhere. The Shikoku on the island in Japan, they want a Camino there. So I think it's a combination of people's desire to get out and away from the modern world and work and screens, coupled with the fact that it sounds more meaningful than just I'm going out for a walk. And it gives them a sense of purpose more than anything. It's got far more sort of value to it. Even though essentially, if you're not religious, it's pretty much the same thing.
There is something, though, very particular about using the word. I recall about 10 years ago, I interviewed a man who had gone on a 2-week pilgrimage. And he told me it was the first time in his work life that he didn't feel guilty about not responding to email. He said he told his colleagues and his manager ahead of time, I'm going to be gone for 2 weeks and I'm going on a pilgrimage. And he said it was simply saying this, it was so free that there was an understanding in his place of employment that he would be off the grid for 2 weeks with absolutely no expectation that he would check his email. And it's interesting because we can take time off of work or we can go on a holiday, but there's something psychologically for many people that they still feel tethered to their places of employment. And so I thought that was interesting. It really kind of sheds light on this idea that it really is a sacred journey. And it doesn't really matter what the parameters are around it, but simply saying the word is an indicator to other people that I'm out. I am not reachable for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 1 day or 5 hours.
And it gives them permission to not feel guilty about it because they're not saying, I'm out for 2 weeks lying at the beach. I'm doing something that really matters. And so please don't interrupt me. Very different. Maybe we should be suggesting everybody takes an annual pilgrimage for that reason because we're all awful at constantly checking our emails. Very bad at it.